What's going on, guys? So a couple of days ago, I had a chance to talk to another SCUM server admin that was having trouble with his server settings, and they reached out to me and asked if I would help, if I would take a look at their server settings, see if I could help. Now, listen, let me just say this ahead of time. I'm not a server guru or anything like that, nor do I have all the answers, but I am always willing. I shouldn't say always because now I'm going to get tons of them, but I am willing when I can to help another server admin in need. So I kind of like went through their settings and saw a couple of things, and it made me want to point a video out about it. And I did check with them and let them know that I'd be making a video from the results of this, but I would not be sharing their name nor their settings. But I did want to share what I did find and what it was about. So what they're looking to do is increase their puppet numbers. And if I can read kind of what they were asking for, basically they're struggling with the puppet spawns on their server. At the moment, they either spawn in huge clusters or barely at all, and they don't seem to be spaced out evenly across the map. We've managed to tweak other settings without any issues, but this has us completely stumped. So, this is one of the things that happens when early on we get a server set up and we're not sure of what settings do what, because of the fact that there really is no real documentation for it. Now you could go and like look through the internet and kind of patch things together and find some information here and there and then try it and see what happens. But I've managed to find some information that has been helpful over the past couple of years, and I've since tried to update it whenever I needed to find out what a setting does. And so I did find a Reddit post that actually there is someone, and I'm going to screw up his name. I know I am. So I'm going to see if I can. So it's like SCHLUNZEX. And he's been a long time poster and contributor, I guess, to the SCUM game Reddit. And and I'll put the link below as far as to this actual Reddit post. But it's a very, very intricate SCUM server settings detailed. And it shows you the default. Let me bring this up on the big screen where you can at least read some of it. SCUM server settings. Here's the name of the setting. Then there's a default value, a minimum value, a max value, and kind of in units, whether it's in seconds, minutes, text, integer, hertz, and so forth. This kind of just gives you an example. The last column here is description. And the description is a little bit more detailed of what we've seen in actual SCUM itself. And this is something that maybe the SCUM admins, and I'm sorry, the SCUM devs, they are admins, should actually be doing and putting this stuff out there. Now, this has not been updated in a little bit of, I think in about a month. This was a month ago, but it's got enough information to get us started in what we needed. A couple of things we're going to be talking about is probably going to be SCUM Max players. We're going to be talking about when we go down to the world. We'll talk about the encounter-based character amount multiplier. We'll talk about the max allowed for each of these here, whether it's characters, puppets, animals, NPCs, and so forth. We're also going to talk about different spawn weights, like, for example, the spawn weights that are for each encounter based on puppet, animal, NPCs, and dropships, and so forth. So we're going to be talking about those different settings, but it's all here. Now, I'm going to give you a link to this. Remember, I'm going to put in the description so you can have this, you can look at it, you can do what you want with it, and it will actually probably help you if you're trying to figure out your settings. There is one more thing that we're going to talk about that I think it's over on the right-hand side. If I go here, this is really important. This is actually a spawn weight calculator, and it's that crazy, let's say, I don't know if you'll be able to see it up there, but let's say if I click on this result here. Okay, so obviously this is a spreadsheet, so it's giving you the cell numbers, but if you can tell, it has let's see, make this a little bit bigger for you. This is the actual formula that we saw weeks ago, and you may have seen this in one of my other videos that I said this formula is some crazy math in order to figure out what the spawn weight result is for each actual character type. And it doesn't make any sense in the Excel spreadsheet. Obviously, this is a Google sheet because it's showing you the reference of the cells where the values are. But that in essence is the mathematics. So don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is, obviously this is included in that link that I'm going to send you so you can actually try it out for yourself. I don't think you can change anything in the red or the results, so don't worry about messing anything up. But you basically change these values and they'll change. And I'll show you that in a moment when we get to that part. But this is very important, very valuable in our conversation. Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a server settings blank INI file. I'm calling it server settings example INI because I'm just going to discuss specific settings. And so this is not the way, obviously, your regular one will look like. If you look at yours, you know, it's going to look like a bunch of different crazy stuff, but that's not what we're going to be doing. So I'm just going to talk about specific settings. So I'm going to write out the settings that we're using so that we can kind of stay focused on where we're at. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is going to be maxed allowed characters, maxed allowed animals, puppets, NPCs, birds, drones, you name it. That is something that a lot of people get wrong when they first get their hands on a server and they're setting it up. And I'm going to show you where the actual issue is. So I'm going to write the very first one that's the most important. So SCUM, oops, it should not be capital, sorry. So we're going to write SCUM dot, and this is going to be max allowed characters. That one's the very first one that we're going to deal with. Now, we're not going to put a value right now because we're going to get the other ones. There we go. So these are the ones we're going to work with. This is just a max allowed, max stuff here. This is important. Now, first off, the reason why this is at the very top, and keep in mind, this is not the order that you'll find this in your server settings INI file. And again, also, if you're doing this from inside of the game, you're like, yeah, I don't know where this is at like that. It's not. This is the server settings INI file. This is not the way it looks like inside the game, but the name that is being used as a variable in the back end on the code on the INI file is basically the same name that you'll be able to find it inside of the game in server settings. Got it? We're good. Trust me, you'll find it. So max allowed characters is very important because a lot of people forget that this max allowed characters means all of these. That's the first thing. Now, the person that I was helping had this set to 1,000. I'm just going to put their settings first. They had this set to a max allowed characters 1,000. They had their players max allowed to 10. Now, what is max players? Max players is the number of people playing on your server at any one given time. The maximum number of people playing on your server at any given time. Okay? 10 is the max for them. Now, the max could be, for us, we used to do 20. For the maximum number, I believe, is 60, not 2,000, is 64, if I'm not mistaken. And unless I've changed that. And the idea of if you have something that's 64, it's usually going to be more of along the lines of a PvP server. A lot of times they're like high population because of the fact that they want to find each other. But it doesn't, this is not a question for us right now. So they had 10. Now we're going to work with 10. They also, I'm going to skip this one for a moment. They had about 100 NPCs set up as max allowed. They had about 30 animals, and they had 0 drones, and they had 15 birds. Now, let's get this one out of the way first. There are no birds in the game. The birds right now are not working. They took them out a long time ago. They have not been back. I don't know what's happening, but maybe they'll come back. So this one doesn't really matter. So whatever you put here doesn't really matter. Let's go back for a second here. Max allowed puppets. They had it at 1,000. Now, can you tell me what is wrong with this? It is the fact that these numbers down here do not total this. These numbers are more than 1,000. We can easily see that because of the fact that max allowed puppets are 1,000. So anything beyond that is going to be messed up. So this may be the reason for their inconsistencies. I don't know how this affects the server. I don't know how this affects the code, but I can tell you that this is not correct. So the reason why is because all characters are included in players, puppets, NPCs, animals, drones, and birds. Those are all the characters. So they have to total the same. So if they wanted to do 1,000, they would have to make sure that all of these numbers equal 1,000. Make sense? Okay. I'm not going to go through and kind of divide what should be what, but I'm going to give you what I think your settings should look like. 1,000, one of the problems with having 1,000 as your max allowed characters is that there is something that is wrong, and it has been wrong for a long time, that when you get beyond, I don't know what the threshold is, but if you put something like 900 puppets or something like that, or 900 as characters, it does not work properly. It kind of like breaks the spawning system. I don't know if they fully tested all the higher level settings. So therefore, they had a lot of people avoided putting a very high amount here. What we do is to increase because they're saying, well, I don't want just one puppet, or just a few here. What you do is you play with your multiplier and your spawn weight. Those are the things that you play with in order to increase the maximum amount in your encounters or when you come across some. And that's what we will be working with. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. But for now, we need to deal with this part first. So what I would suggest is a max allowed character of somewhere between 500 and 600. I just honestly, you don't need to go any more than that. For our sake, let's see. If you want to, hey, go for it. But I really would suggest staying below 900. So here, let's go ahead. And by the way, like I said in the beginning, I'm not a guru. I just know what's worked for me. And I've tested multiple servers this way. And I know some people are like, yeah, well, it works on my server fine. You know what? This is the thing. It may work, but the inconsistency across the board is what the problem is. So I try to keep things consistent. Let's say I'm going to use 600 here. So now I've got to go ahead and come up with what is going to be my number that I want to put here. So I'm going to say max allowed puppets is 400. I'm leaving 10 as my max players, making believe that I have a small server. I'm going to leave this at 100. Right now I have 500. I have animals at 50. So let's say I want a lot of NPCs because I really don't want any drones or birds because it doesn't really matter for the birds. But I still have 50. I have like 40 to play with here, right? So maybe I don't want as many animals. I'll say 40. But I want more NPCs. So now this should total 600. 400 plus 150 plus 40 plus 10 is 600. So there we go. That is an easy way of breaking it down. But this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to have 400 puppets at one time or not. So let's move on to the next thing. But this is kind of where I would start out with. Our next part is going to be the base character amount multiplier. So let's go ahead and get this one in there. Okay, there it is. So let's talk about this one for a second. The base character amount multiplier. So this is the explanation that spreadsheet that I told you about gives. This multiplies the base character count in an encounter with the standard number per zone. These LTZ, MTCs, HTCs are whether something is considered low, medium, or high. In other words, a town may just be considered an LTZ. An LTZ meaning that it's just a low, kind of a low zone, a zone that's not going to be heavily populated with puppets, but there are going to be some there. So there may be 1 to 2 puppets. This is at, like if you set it at 1, set the amount multiplier here at 1. So they may be 1 to 2 puppets. If you're in a medium zone, now it depends on what each area on the map is set up as. And now I don't have a list of that, unfortunately. I really need to search for that. But some areas in the map are set up as LTCs, some are MTCs, and some are HTCs. Now, I think I can intelligently say, without being wrong, that the HTCs are usually like bunkers or POIs, especially like sub-naval base, the torpedo bay, maybe the city. Anything that's like meant as a POI or a bunker, I believe those would be considered HTCs. Now, you can't quote me on that, but I think that's a good, intelligent assumption. So, for example, if your multiplier was set to 3, let's say we're going to set this to 3, which is the max amount because you're looking at having a lot of puppets, right? So if you set this to 3, that means this is the multiplication it does. For MTCs, it's going to be like, for example, this is the medium one. It's going to say 3 times 2 or 3 times 3. It's going to be one or the other, a range in between that. So in this case, 3 times 2 is what? Yeah, we know, 6. And 3 times 3 is 9. So in that case, this setting will give you anywhere between 6 and 9 puppets per encounter. Now remember, encounter is not like the horde encounter. Encounter is like basically whenever you, quote unquote, encounter anything. So that is the way this works. So if you want these numbers to be higher as far as what you come into, this is the place that you're supposed to be doing it. Right here, if I can highlight it, scum.encounter-based character amount multiplier. And again, if you're on the inside of the game and you're doing server settings from within, Just look for what says encounter base character amount multiplier. That's they basically set it up that way. So here it is. So 3 is the max amount. Now the values in this is 1, 2, and 3. 3 being the max. That's why we're using 3. So that's what that is. I'm going to leave this up here so you can just see this in case you're copying the sound. But that's the example that it shows. Now we're going to move on to the next, because that takes care of base. By the way, you're asking, is that only for puppets? No, that's for all characters. So that actually gives you an amount multiplier for the base of all characters, not just puppets. So that kind of helps. Now, what's weird with this is that I don't think that's the case when it comes to animals. And so this might not work that way. It is very weird that, I'm asking that question out loud as I'm thinking about it, because of the fact that I really don't think I've ever seen 9 animals attack me at one time, with this being 3. So I think this only pertains to puppets and maybe NPCs. I think somehow or another they may have excluded this from animals. I could be wrong. That's why I'm going to check. There's no regular amount multiplier for animals. And I don't think it also does not do the drone thing or the bird thing. I think this only matters for puppets, and it could possibly NPCs. Not 100% of the NPC one. We'll check that in a moment. All right, let's move on. Actually, should we do that now? Let's see. NPC world. No, there's a world one. Nope, there is not. So there isn't a separate setting for that. This is a wait. We'll deal with the wait in a moment. All right, so now we got that. This is the next one. This has to do with number of players in your party, or number of people going into a bunker at the same time, even if they're not the same squad. I'm just going to write extra, and I'll get it here. Extra encounter per player multiplier. Perfect. That's what we want. So again, I'm going to go ahead and grab the definition for this from our spreadsheet that we're using. So this one increases the base character count in an encounter according to the formula. So the formula is a standard number plus number of players minus 1 times extra number per player times multiplier. All right, so this is the multiplier. The multiplier, again, is a max of 3. It's 1 to 3. So if we're going to use 3 as the most, meaning that the more players you have, the more spawning will happen. Standard number, what does that mean? Okay, let's look for the standard number is, again, these numbers here, the LTC, MTC, and HTC numbers. That's what the standard number is, depending on what area you're in and what kind of zone it's labeled at. That's the number that will be used as a standard number. Plus number of players. Let's say your party has 3, and then you're going to minus 1 of them because they're taking you out of it. Minus 1 means that if it's 3 players going in, you're already in this encounter-based character multiplier. So all we're doing is dealing with the other 2 people because you're a party of 3. So that means that number is going to be 2 in this case. And then here, we're going to do an extra number per player. So extra number per player times multiplier. So what are we doing? So then for this if this is correct, this is what this would look like. So it'd be standard number. Let's say we're doing a medium, an MTZ. I'm going to do an MTZ just so we stay on board. So I'm going to do 3 plus number of players minus 1 would be 2 plus extra number per players. That doesn't make sense, but I'm just going to say extra number per player. So I'm going to say 3, which is the number of players. And then we're going to multiply this by the multiplier. And in our case, it's 3. I know there's a lot of 3s in there. So 3 plus 2 is 5, plus 3 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. So according to this, if this math is correct, and I don't believe that it is. Hold on a second. Maximum number of NPCs. No, it's not. It is not a separate one here. Okay, well, let's go with this. So this is the only part that's kind of confusing, but I believe this is the total number of players. Extra number per player. So how many players is 1? Add 1 is 3. Yeah, it's got to make sense. So we're just going to go that. Per player multiplier is 3. So here it is. Here's 24. So according to this, that means that we're going to have, if we have 3 players going in and this is set to 3, they're saying that you're going to get anywhere between, this is 3, hold on, MTC, 3, I did the max. Anywhere between 24 max of possible puppets. That sounds crazy. I don't, that really does sound crazy. What is the lower number if I do this by 2? So if I change this to 2, it's going to be 2 plus 2 is 4. Plus 3 is 7. 7 times 3 is 21. So it'd be a 21 or 20 or 24 or somewhere in between that. That is a huge number. Now we'll have to test that. But according to this, that's what it's supposed to do. Now, normally you have this at 1. And if you change that to 1, you're not going to have as many. Let's see. We're changing that to 1. So that would be the multiplier at the end. So 3. Let's leave 3. 3 plus 2 is 6. I'm sorry. 3 plus 2 is 5 plus 8. 8 plus 1 is not 8 times 1 is 8. So it'd be 8. Yeah. So you would only, that's a big difference. Having 8 as a default versus having 24, which makes sense. But that's crazy. So there you go. That's one of the ways. That right there in itself is one of the ways that you're going to be increasing your amount of. I've never actually looked at these. I mean, I've looked at them, but when you actually sit here and you multiply this and you think about the possibility of 24 in one account, you better have the bullets for that, brother. I'm just saying. You got 3 of you. You better be able to take them out. Let's go to one extra place that we want to talk about is spawn weight. Now, spawn weight is considered what you may know as probability. Now, this is important. This is where this actual thingamajiggy here comes into play. Remember I showed you this earlier? This is important. This is a calculator we're going to use for spawn weight, and there's a reason for that. So we'll come right back to that. Just give me a moment to type these things in. So we're dealing with spawn weight now. So can I scroll this up and put spawn weights? And we'll put equals there. We'll come back to that. And by the way, can we drop down for a second? We're going to do scum dot. Okay. And then there should be an animal one. Animal. And there's one more. It's called the dropship. Okay. Come back to these in a second. Let me go ahead and grab the definition or discuss the definition for you. So this right here is the definition that they're giving you for the spawn weights, in this case for puppets. It says multiplier for the spawn weight of puppets in an encounter. Now, you need to know one thing. One thing that's really important is that this is the confusing part when it comes to the devs and how they name things. When you're talking about something that's world, in the past, the word world in a setting meant wild. That's how it kind of played out. When it was world, it meant in the wild. Nowadays, I'm not 100% sure anymore if world now means the entire thing, whether it's in the wild, that means when you're running in between towns, or whether it's even in towns. So that's the problem that this wording has. But regardless, we're just going to look at it as spawn weight multiplier so that we can see the probability of coming across something like this. So there's puppets, there's NPCs, there's animals, and there's dropships. Now there's 2 things that we can do deductive reasoning with. For example, we can now assume based on deductive reasoning, which by the way, it's by going backwards, like things that we can remove that we know are true, is for example, we know that animals do not exist in towns or POIs. They don't spawn in there. There is something in the code, I'm sure that they wrote, that make it so that animals do not spawn let me correct myself, in bunkers and POIs. In towns, I've seen bunnies. I don't know if it's the same thing. I've never really seen a bear in town. I'm trying to think of times when I've seen a bear or a set of wolves in town, and I can't recall that. If you have, I would love to hear about it in the comments because that would probably be a freaking party. Anyways, I have not seen that, but it's possible. So maybe that is everywhere. Dropships, I've seen in the wild. I have not seen dropships in a town. I have not seen dropships in a bunker, unless it's the abandoned bunkers, which is an encounter that is triggered by an alarm. That's different. But for regular bunkers, I've not seen a dropship, and obviously inside the bunker, you don't see one, and I have not seen one in a town. So again, that's just me, but we're going to take this as, regardless of whether it says world, this is the possibility or probability of having a puppet, NPC, animal, or dropship spawn. Okay, so we're going to work with that. Now, this is important because we're going to set these up based on settings. Default values, I'm going to go here. Okay, so default value for these are 1. So if this is set to 1, that is a default value. Now, that doesn't mean that only 1 comes out. This is a default value. I'm going to show you the calculation in a second. The minimum number is 0. The maximum number is 3. Okay? Now, why is this important? I'm going to show you right now. So we're going to take that information and we're going to look at the examples here. All right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at how this is working here. Now, obviously they have some other settings, but we're going to plug in the numbers. So the puppet spawn weight multiplier is 1, the animal one is 1, the NPCs is 1, and the dropship is 1. Dropship fixed duration, don't worry about that. We can't edit that. That stays the same. Base values is the values that are given in the game itself. We cannot edit those, so don't worry about those. That's what the base values are. So the only thing we're going to worry about is these owner settings, or settings that we actually put. Now, with setting them up as default of 1, you automatically are saying that your spawn weight or probability of having a puppet spawn is 60%. Now, these amounts should equal, if I'm not mistaken, should equal 100. So yes, 60 plus 19 plus 15 plus 1 plus 5. And by the way, this is somebody that's European. That's why they use commas instead of periods. But that equals to 100. So 60% of the time is you have a 60% chance that it's going to be a puppet. You have a 19% chance that it's going to be an animal, a 15% chance that it's going to be an NPC, and this is per encounter in the world. And then we have this down one, disregard that duration one, but the dropship, there's a 5% chance, right? This is when it's set to default of 1. If we automatically say, like, for example, for me, I say I don't want any dropship, so I'm going to say 0. It automatically zeroes out the percentage for the spawn weight of the dropship, or chances of it spawning. Let me put it at 1 again so you can see that. We went from 60% of puppets to adding 0 here to 63%. Now we have 63%, 20% for animals, and 15% for NPCs. Now, if you're like me, you're wondering, now wait a second, I don't want more animals than NPCs. I want a greater chance of NPCs. So what do? Let's say I add the number 2 here. And so let's see what happens there. Well, great. Now I have 54%. It has dropped in puppets. Animals have dropped to 17%, but NPCs have moved up to 27%. So this is how you fluctuate with these numbers. So let's put something more realistic. I definitely want more puppets. I don't care so much about the animals, so I'm going to leave that there. So the animals are going to be at that percentage. Now, do I want more puppets than NPCs? Probably. So if I say 3 there, it's going to raise me up to 78%. If I say animals of 1 and NPCs of 2, now I have a 13% chance for NPCs and a 78% chance of puppets. I'm still not happy with that. So let's try something. I don't know. Can we do 2.5? I'm not sure if we can, but I'm going to try. I know that here we can do 2.5, but I'm not sure if we can do that. And no, we cannot do that because it breaks everything. So it's not taking decimals. We can't do decimals because, as you can tell, the minute I put 2.5, it broke everything. And now it's saying that it's going to be always NPCs. That's not 100% true. So now we know it's either 1, 2, or 3, or 0. So there we go. So now we have 3 and 2. If I put this to 3, what happens? That's not bad. So it's increasing a little bit more. If I want no animals, I can put this to 0. So if I was interested in increasing my amount of puppets and NPCs, I would go with 3, 1, 3, and then 0 for dropships and no dropships. Now, if you did have to add dropships, let's just do that for fun. Because some of you do play with dropships. It still doesn't cause too much of an issue. But my most important part of this was, if you remembered at the very beginning, animals were greater than NPCs. I did not want that. I want NPCs to be a greater spawn weight than actual animals. So I'm going to go with this settings. And this is assuming that we're going to have dropships. So I will go ahead and plug these in. 3, 1, 3, 1. And they're not in that order on mine, so I'm going to have to say 3, 3, 1, and 1. All right. So we're going to change this to 3. We'll change this to 3. We'll leave that to 1 and 1 to 1. So I have a greater spawn weight for the NPCs and for the puppets. And that means based on these settings and based on the calculations that they've given us from patch notes and things like that, that this person that we linked him in the description, is giving us in a calculator, which basically says 72% of puppets, 18% of chance of NPCs, and a 7.6% chance of getting animals. I don't really care about the dropship, so I'm going to leave that alone. So that's how that works. We've discussed the max allowed, but the most important thing about this is that, remember I said, these should total up to the max allowed characters. All right, let's move down to the next one. Then we talked about amount multipliers. I'm just going to write amount multipliers here. And that right there, my friends, means that basically encounter-based character amount multiplier, 3 is the max. If we want more puppets and more NPCs and more everything else, this is the number that you're going to use. Not 100% sure if this works for actual animals, but if it does, that would be insane because I'd love to see 24 animals attacking me at one time. That is the calculation based there. That's the example of a calculation based on the different zones. Remember LTC, MTC, HTC, low, medium, and high. That's the zone. That's the areas that are labeled that way. We don't have a map that shows what's what, but we kind of can make an assumption. The hot zones or the high zones with high threat zones will actually be POIs and bunkers. So keep that in mind. Then we talked about extra characters, which is right here, so I don't have to label that differently. That also affects the amount multiplier that comes out. So we leave that alone. And then this is the last one. This is the probability. One and the same. I like to call them probability, but a lot of people go with spawn weight. And this right here, my friends, like we just discussed, is basically the multipliers you need to set up based on that calculation to show you, again, the results of what percentage you will have a chance at getting one of these types of encounters. So keep that in mind. That's actually good there. Like I said, that spreadsheet that I'll link in from that gentleman that put it up on the Reddit is going to be in the description. So you'll see that. So there's one more setting I want to talk about because in reading some of this, I'm going to go through this for a moment. I love, by the way, some people don't like Reddit, but there's some things on Reddit that I do like sometimes. Then somebody asked a question, which has a lot to do with what we just discussed. This is actually from the guy itself that posted this spreadsheet. And he says everything that we kind of talked about, which is basically set the encounter-based character amount multiplier and the extra character per player multiplier to 3. Same for the horde setting. By the way, I did not talk about horde settings. This is not a video for that. But yeah, basically you can do the same thing with horde settings. All the encounters you can do that way. And then also he says, let the encounter can remove low priority characters. Now that's the one that I wanted to share with you before I leave. It's the encounter. Let me, I think, is it still SCUM? Yeah, it's SCUM. And I believe this one, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm gonna look. I want to look because I want to give you the right information. I'm finding it. Here it is. Okay. The default value is 1. I'm sorry. The max value is 1. The minimum value is 0. So what that means is, in case you don't know this, I'm going to put this in here in parentheses so you see this. 0 equals off. And I'm going to put comma. 1 equals on. This is really important in code. So the point being is, if this says 0 on it, that means that this is not on. If it says 1, that means it's on. And that's how it is. The one other thing that you should be aware of is whenever and this is just extra information, whenever you see -1, this is a default variable. So that's a default variable for a default value. Okay? Which means that it doesn't mean that that actual entry or value is -1 and then you use that as a multiplier. It means that that number, that actual -1 signifies another value that is hard-coded in the code by the devs. In some cases, we know that, like for example, I think, I'm trying to find a good example, but sometimes this -1 could mean 64. Sometimes it can mean 128. Like the amount of max allowed puppets would be -1. And you're like, -1? That means they're less than 0? No, it just means that they're using a default value of 128. So whether you're writing 128 or -1, it's kind of the same thing. So this is just extra information for you as far as programming code, whatever. But this is important. So remember this. Encounter can remove low priority characters equals 1. Turn that on. And the reason why you turn that on, and I'll let the Reddit post explain that real quick. So inactive puppets can be deleted. It gives, in other words, things that are no longer active, that they're not there, they're not in the scope, they're not near another player or anything. They just get deleted, so they don't take up your count. That's important. Give max allowed characters and max allowed puppets high numbers, and lower it for the rest. So again, 500 for characters, so 250 for puppets. This is what it's explaining. We explained this already. 500 max allowed characters, but 250 of those is the puppets, and break down the rest into the other entries. Let's see. What else does he say here? Oh, this is one that I don't talk about, but I'm just going to read this one to you. Encounter global zone cooldown multiplier should be low, so encounters can occur more often. Let's find you that one. Okay, here we go. We're going to find you that one. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this is also an important one. By the way, let me get rid of that because people are going to be like, what? Does that mean that can be -1? No. That one, it's a default value of 1, a minimum value of 0, and according to this, a maximum value of 1 million. That doesn't make sense to me, but according to this, it says should be low. So encounters can occur more often. The minimum value is 0. So if the minimum value is 0 and it's saying it should be low, I would set it to 0. But that's, again, I don't talk about this one too much because I don't mess with that one. I think I did recently just for some fun stuff. But there you go. So it will happen. And the reason that one is important is because encounters can occur more often if you set this one to low. And the minimum value is 0. Maximum value says it's 1 million. I don't know why it would be 1 million, but it says, I believe that's what they wrote there. That's kind of crazy. Last couple of things that I'll talk about here. Puppet World encounters spawn weight multiplier. We talked about that. See, stuff that I've already discussed, they're actually mentioning it, which is good. I'm on the right track. Enable encounter manager low player count mode. Off on server, on in single player. We'll go ahead and put this one in your list here. Is going to be off. For servers, for single player, I'll put in the parentheses next to it. 1 for single player. And they said to do that. Okay, that's everything. Now, it's great to go through this Reddit only because, there's lots of people that are dealing with the same thing and they give really information there. These are the options with the biggest impact for my testing. There are other options with impact puppet numbers, but I think they were just fine-tuned area. So it's great. I'm glad I found this after the fact. I did not read this earlier. I was kind of glancing through here, but that is a really good little post that's in there. So that's great. That's from the Reddit description I actually sent. I'm going to put in the description. Now, there's one last thing I'm going to show you. This is kind of a bonus. So this is this whole section is like bonus area. We've already covered everything we wanted to, but there was one last thing I want to show you from my discussion. When I was helping this gentleman with his server, I noticed that his abandoned bunker settings were kind of all over the place. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to share this. So when we're talking abandoned bunker commotion threshold player per player, enemy activation threshold per player. This is about abandoned bunkers. Now, I have a video on this, and you can see that video if you just look under. I actually set up all my SCUM settings or how-to videos in one playlist, so you can find them easily if you just go on my YouTube page and you can just look at that playlist. You'll be able to find this. But this was a recent one I did maybe a month ago or something, and we talked about the abandoned bunkers, and this is directly from that conversation. I wanted you to understand that the default values that are set are listed here as 4.75, 5.5, and 1. And people are wondering, how do I change this to be harder or easier for abandoned bunkers? And it's really simple. If you want to go harder, you put the numbers lower. If you want to go easier, you put the numbers higher. And so that's kind of what I explained with that. And some people thought that by adding just a 1 to all of them, just 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 was the way to go. And that would be like, yeah, it's the easiest way it can be. Yes and no. So no, is really the answer. I would say yes and no because it depends on which value we're talking about. But really the answer is no. If you want it to be easier, you have to put the number higher. In my example, I said you put it at 100, it's going to be really easy. But I gave you server examples that I worked with, which I think across the board, commotion threshold, I put it at 5. Commotion threshold per player, I put at 2. Enemy activation threshold, I put at 5. And activation threshold per player, I put at 2. All of those are technically higher, I believe, than all the settings here. So therefore, it made it easier, but not exactly the easiest. Because like I said, you could put it at 100 or something like that. It's just extra bonus information. I know some people are confused with the abandoned bunkers. So if you want to hear about abandoned bunkers and you want to like walk through those settings, make sure you check out that video. So that's what I got. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. I hope that helped some of you. I know it's a long video, longer than necessary, probably, but I love to give you as much information as I have. Until next time, take care of yourselves. I'm out. Peace.